The impossible scene crystallized in the frozen air of January 12th, 1888. Outside William Hartley's cabin, the Dakota blizzard screamed with a voice that could strip flesh from bone. 42 degrees below zero. Wind gusts exceeding 50 miles per hour. A whiteout so complete that a man could stand 3 feet from his own door and never find it again. Silas Croft fought his team of horses through drifts that rose higher than a man's head. The old builder had seen 40 winters in this territory, but nothing like this. This was the storm people would whisper about for generations. The killer, the widowmaker. He had loaded his sleigh with half a cord of his finest seasoned oak before dawn. His wife Sarah had begged him not to go. "You'll die out there," she'd said, tears freezing on her cheeks. But Silas knew families were dying in their homes. The Miller family had already lost 2 children. The Brennans were burning furniture. And that fool from Boston, William Hartley, living alone with 2 small children in that pathetic cabin with his insane ditch project. Silas was certain he'd find frozen corpses. The journey that normally took 20 minutes had consumed nearly 2 hours. Ice caked Silas's beard so thick he could barely breathe. His hands, even in double mittens, had gone numb an hour ago. The horses were near collapse. When he finally saw the dim outline of Hartley's cabin through the white chaos, Silas felt a strange unease. Something was wrong. The chimney smoke was barely visible, just a thin wisp, pale and lazy like you'd see on a mild autumn afternoon. Not the desperate black column of a fire being fed every log a family possessed. "They're already dead," Silas thought. Fire must have gone out hours ago. He half fell from the sleigh, stumbled to the door, and hammered with a fist he could no longer feel. The door opened. Warmth hit him like a physical blow. Not the scorching blast of an overstoked stove. Something gentler, steadier, like stepping from January into May. William Hartley stood in the doorway, 6'1", broad-shouldered, with a dark beard and the calloused hands of a man who worked with tools. He wore a simple wool shirt, no coat, no hat. His face showed no distress, no desperation, just mild concern. "Silas," William said, his voice calm and measured, "you shouldn't be out in this weather." Silas tried to speak, but his jaw wouldn't work. Ice crackled in his beard. "Come in," William said, reaching out to pull the older man inside. "You're half frozen." Silas stumbled across the threshold. The door closed behind him, shutting out the banshee shriek of the wind. The silence that followed felt like a physical presence. And the warmth. Dear God, the warmth. Silas's eyes adjusted to the lamplight. At the wooden table in the center of the room sat Benjamin, a serious-faced boy of 9, and Grace, 7 years old, with her mother's eyes. They were playing checkers. Both children wore simple cotton shirts, not coats, not blankets wrapped around their shoulders. They looked up at the ice-covered stranger and smiled. "Hello, Mr. Croft," Benjamin said politely. Silas couldn't process what he was seeing. His mind, trained by 40 years of building in this brutal land, kept rejecting the evidence before him. The small cast-iron stove in the corner glowed with a gentle fire, not the roaring inferno every other family in the valley was desperately maintaining. The walls showed no frost. The windows had no ice on the inside. The air felt still and comfortable without the drafts that plagued every structure Silas had ever built. His eyes found the thermometer on the wall. He stumbled toward it, dripping melted ice across the wooden floor. Wiped the glass with a frozen glove. The mercury sat at 62 degrees Fahrenheit. Silas's legs gave out. He sat heavily in the chair William guided him to. "How?" Silas whispered. "How are you doing this?" William moved to the stove, poured hot coffee from a pot. Geothermal heat exchange, passive ventilation, basic mining engineering principles. The words meant nothing to Silas. His world, everything he thought he knew about surviving Dakota winters, was crumbling. "The tunnel," William continued. "Would you like to see it?" Silas looked at the small door set into the floor near the corner, a stairway leading down. He'd heard rumors about Hartley's insane project, the ditch to nowhere, the grave he was digging for his family. "That thing works," Silas managed. "It works," William said simply. "The math said it would. The math was right." And as the warmth slowly returned, feeling to Silas Croft's frozen limbs as he sat in that impossibly warm cabin, while outside the worst blizzard in memory tried to kill everything that breathed, one thought echoed in his mind. "We've been doing this wrong. For 50 years, we've been doing this wrong." But to understand how William Hartley had arrived at this moment of quiet triumph, we must go back. Back 6 months to when everything changed, September 18th, 1887. The day William R. Hartley's world ended for the second time. The Black Hills Mining Company office smelled of tobacco, old paper, and the distinctive mineral scent that clung to everything connected with the mines. William sat at his desk, studying geological surveys by lamplight, even though the sun still blazed outside. He was a man who found comfort and precision in the clean logic of numbers and stone. Benjamin pushed open the door. "Papa, when are we going home?" William glanced up from his calculations. 20 minutes, son. I need to finish these load-bearing computations." The boy moved to his father's side, looking at the complex diagrams spread across the desk. Cross-sections of mine shafts, pressure calculations, ventilation schematics. "What are you working on?" "Determining safe depth for the new shaft. Have to calculate rock pressure, temperature gradient, moisture content. If I'm wrong by even a small margin, men die." William's voice carried no drama, just fact. Benjamin studied his father's face. "You're never wrong." "I'm wrong plenty. That's why I check everything 3 times. William ruffled his son's hair. "Being careful isn't the same as being perfect." The door opened again. Mr. Harrison, the mine superintendent, stepped in. His face carried the gray weight of bad news. "William, need a word." 10 minutes later, William walked out of that office with his world in pieces. The mine was closing. The vein had played out 2 years earlier than projected. The company was bankrupt. Every engineer, every worker released immediately. Severance pay of $280. 30 days to vacate company housing. William stood in the September sunlight, feeling nothing. Just the cold mathematical assessment of his situation running through his mind like one of his geological surveys. No job, no prospects in a town built entirely around a dead mine. 2 children depending on him. Winter coming. Benjamin emerged from the office, saw his father's face. "Papa, what's wrong?" William looked at his son. 9 years old, smart as a whip, asked questions that would impress university professors. And Grace, 7, who still sang to the chickens every morning, like her mother used to. Catherine's voice echoed from memory. "Promise me you'll take care of them. Promise me." "We're going to be fine, Ben," William said. The lie tasted like copper in his mouth. That night, after the children were asleep, William sat alone in the small cabin he'd purchased a year earlier, planning for a future that now seemed impossible. He'd bought it outright against the advice of everyone who said to save the money. But William didn't trust company housing. Didn't trust anything he couldn't control through planning and preparation. Now that decision might be the only thing standing between his children and disaster. He opened the trunk that held Catherine's things. Hadn't looked inside since she'd died 2 years earlier. Tuberculosis had taken her slowly, each cough stealing a little more of her until there was nothing left. William had worked 18-hour days trying to pay doctors who couldn't help and medicine that didn't work. He'd solved 1,000 engineering problems in the mines, but couldn't solve the one problem that mattered. Her last words, "Promise me you will take care of them. Benjamin needs you to teach him. Grace needs you to love her." He'd promised, and he'd failed at the second part. Teaching he could do, engineering principles, mathematics, geology. But love required vulnerability. Emotion, things William had locked away after Catherine died. He provided for his children, protected them. But the warmth, the affection, the comfort they needed. He didn't know how to give that anymore. William closed the trunk and opened his ledger instead. Numbers he could handle. Assets, $280 cash. The cabin 24 by 20 feet solidly built. 4 cords of seasoned oak he'd cut the previous autumn. 2 milk cows, 1 mule, 14 chickens in a barn 60 feet from the house. Tools, his engineering instruments. Expenses for winter. Food $60 for 3 months. Clothing for growing children $20. Lamp oil and candles $15. Emergency fund $50. And firewood. William's pencil paused. Last winter, with Catherine alive and the mine-paying wages, they'd burned 7 cords of oak. 7 cords at current prices meant $126. Money he didn't have. He had 4 cords. 4 cords to survive a Dakota winter. The mathematics were brutal and simple. 4 divided by 7 equaled 0.57. He had 57% of the fuel needed. To survive, his family would need to maintain livable temperature with 57% of normal fuel consumption. physically impossible without reducing the cabin's heat loss by at least 40%. William stared at the numbers. In the mines, when you hit an impossible equation, it meant your assumptions were wrong. You had to think differently. Find a variable you'd missed. What variable was he missing? The question haunted him for days. He checked and rechecked his calculations, examined every aspect of the cabin's construction, considered burning furniture, but that would buy maybe 2 weeks. Considered buying greenwood cheaper, but half the heat value and dangerous creosote buildup that could burn the cabin down. Nothing worked. The math kept returning the same answer. Insufficient fuel equals death. On September 24th, the first frost came. William lit the stove against the evening chill. Benjamin and Grace did their lessons at the table. William watched as Benjamin exhaled, his breath visible in the air near the far wall. That small cloud of vapor triggered something in William's engineer mind. He saw the problem with sudden, brutal clarity. The cabin wasn't just losing heat, it was hemorrhaging it. Every surface, every crack, every time the door opened. They weren't fighting the cold. They were trying to bail out a sinking ship with a teaspoon. But what if there was another way? William's mind jumped to the mines, to conversations with old Russian engineers who trained in the Ural Mountains. Deep shaft mining, they'd said, operated on principles that seemed impossible to men who'd only worked surface operations. In winter, when surface temperatures hit 40 below, miners would descend into shafts and find the temperature rising with every foot of depth. At 100 feet, it might be 50 degrees. At 500 feet, warm enough to work in shirt sleeves. The earth held heat. The deep earth never froze, never experienced winter, maintained a constant temperature year-round. The principle was geothermal gradient. The deeper you went, the warmer it got. But you didn't need to go deep to see the effect. You only needed to get below what miners called the frost line. In Dakota Territory, the frost line sat approximately 4.5 feet deep. Above that depth, the ground froze solid in winter. Below it, the earth maintained a relatively constant temperature of 45 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit, regardless of surface conditions. William's pencil began to move, sketching rapidly. If the earth at 5 feet maintained 50 degrees, and if cold air could be brought into contact with that constant temperature source, and if that pre-warmed air could then be introduced into the cabin, the stove wouldn't be fighting to heat air from 40 below to 60 above. It would only need to boost already warm air from 50 to 60, a 10-degree increase instead of 100-degree increase. The fuel consumption would drop. Not by half, by much more. Benjamin appeared at his elbow. "Papa, what are you drawing?" William looked at his son. "A tunnel, Ben, an underground passage." "Like in the mines." "Exactly like the mines." Grace, half asleep at the table, murmured, "Are we going to live underground like rabbits?" William smiled for the first time in days. "Something like that, sweetheart." But the smile faded as he worked through the calculations. The engineering was sound. The physics were proven. But the cost, he'd need timber for framing, corrugated iron for roofing, gravel for drainage, hardware, tools he didn't own. The estimate came to $90 to $100, half his remaining money. If he was wrong, if the system failed, he'd have wasted resources they desperately needed, and his children would pay the price. William looked at his calculations. The math was elegant, beautiful even. Heat transfer coefficients, thermal mass, passive convection. It all worked on paper, but paper didn't keep children warm. He thought of Catherine, of her faith in him, of promises made. William picked up his pencil and wrote across the top of his calculations, "Trust the math. Always trust the math." The decision was made. October 1st brought notice of a military surplus auction at Fort Meade. William hitched the mule to the wagon and made the day-long journey alone. Benjamin wanted to come, but William needed him to watch Grace. The fort's quartermaster, a career soldier with the weathered face of a man who'd seen too many winters, regarded William skeptically. "What exactly are you looking for?" "Corrugated iron sheeting, as much as $50 will buy." "Building what?" "A structure," William said. He'd learned that vague answers discouraged further questions. The quartermaster showed him to a yard filled with salvaged materials from demolished barracks. The iron sheets were used, some rusted, but structurally sound. William examined each piece with an engineer's eye, checking for critical corrosion or damage. "I can give you 40 sheets for $50. Another $12 gets you those rough-cut timbers. The quartermaster gestured to a pile of lumber. Framed timbers from the old officers' quarters we tore down last month. William did the math. $62. More than he wanted to spend, but less than he'd feared. Done. Loading the wagon alone took an hour. The iron sheets were awkward and heavy. The timbers, even more so. By the time William finished, his hands were bleeding and his back screamed, but the materials were his. The drive home took until well after dark. When William finally pulled into his yard, he found Thomas Brennan waiting. Thomas was a rancher, mid-40s, with the weathered competence of a man born to the frontier. His family had been in Dakota for 2 generations. He regarded newcomers, especially educated men from back east, with barely concealed disdain. "Hartley," Thomas said, eyeing the loaded wagon. "What in hell is all that?" William climbed down stiffly. "Materials." "For what?" "A tunnel, from the house to the barn." Thomas stared at him. "A tunnel? You mean like a root cellar?" "No, a passage, underground walkway." "Why the devil would you need that?" William was too tired for this conversation. In a blizzard, 60 feet is a death sentence for children. The tunnel eliminates exposure. Thomas shook his head slowly. "Hartley, you use a rope line between buildings. Everyone does. String it up, hold on, walk between. Simple. A rope line doesn't steady wind chill. At 40 below with 20-mile-per-hour winds, a child can get frostbite in under 5 minutes. So you dig a hole instead. You know what happens when spring thaw comes? That ditch fills with water like a cistern, floods your foundation, rots everything." William's jaw tightened. "I've accounted for drainage." "Have you? You're a mine engineer, not a builder. This is Dakota, not whatever fancy school you went to. Out here, we know what works. And what works is freezing half to death every winter." The words came out sharper than William intended. Thomas's face darkened. "My family's survived 20 winters just fine. We don't need some Boston know-it-all telling us we're doing it wrong." Thomas climbed onto his horse. "When that fool project of yours fails and you need help, don't come crying to me." He rode off into the darkness. William stood alone in his yard looking at the wagon loaded with materials that represented half his remaining money. Bet on an idea that everyone thought was insane. Benjamin appeared in the cabin doorway. "Papa, is everything all right?" William looked at his son, 9 years old, trusting completely that his father knew what he was doing. "Everything's fine, Ben. Help me unload these timbers." They worked together in the lamplight stacking materials. Benjamin asked about the project, and William explained the principles. Heat retention, thermal mass, geothermal gradient. The boy absorbed it all, asked intelligent questions, made observations that showed he understood not just what, but why. Working with his son, teaching through doing, William felt something loosen in his chest. Maybe he wasn't completely failing at this fatherhood thing. At midnight, materials unloaded and Benjamin asleep. William stood looking at the 60 feet between cabin and barn. Tomorrow he would drive the first stake, mark the first line, turn theory into reality. He thought of Silas Croft, the master builder who'd constructed half the houses in the valley. Thought of Thomas Brennan and his frontier certainty. Thought of all the men who'd look at his project and see only folly. Let them look, William thought. Numbers don't lie, and the numbers say this will work. October 8th dawned cold and clear. William set his stakes at precisely 60 feet apart, 4 feet wide, used string lines to ensure perfect straightness, an engineer's precision applied to a ditch. Benjamin and Grace watched from the window as their father drove the first shovel into the earth. The work was brutal. The first 8 inches were easy prairie soil accumulated over centuries. But below that lay clay dense and stubborn. Below the clay, rock. William attacked it with the pickaxe that had belonged to his father, brought west from Pennsylvania 30 years earlier. 12 pounds of forged iron. Every swing jarred his shoulders. Every impact rang like a bell. He established a rhythm, pickaxe to break the clay, shovel to remove it, wheelbarrow to haul it away, 4 to 6 feet per day, 12 to 14 days total. Benjamin begged to help. William let him wheel the dirt away, pile it in berms along the sides. The boy took the job seriously, working with the focused intensity he brought to everything. Grace appointed herself water bearer and morale officer. Every hour she'd bring a dipper of water and sing songs she made up about tunnels and rabbits and staying warm. On the third day, Henry Walsh rode past. A German immigrant, solid and skeptical, he stopped his horse and watched William working in the deepening trench. "Herr Hartley, what are you doing?" William looked up, face streaked with mud and sweat. "Digging a trench. I can see dis, but by winter access to the barn and passive heating." Henry's face showed complete incomprehension. "Passive heating from a hole. From the earth, below the frost line, temperature stays constant, 45 to 50 degrees. Air passing through the tunnel will warm up." Henry was silent for a long moment. Then he shook his head and rode on. That evening, he told his wife Martha, "The engineer has gone mad, digging a grave in his yard." But Martha, who'd been a teacher before marriage, said quietly, "Or maybe he understands something we don't." By the end of the second week, half the valley had ridden past to gawk at Hartley's folly. Most just stared. Some offered unwanted advice. A few made jokes. On October 15th, a group of cowboys from the Colby Ranch stopped their horses. The leader, Jake Mercer, a hard-faced man in his late 20s, called down, "Hey, Boston, digging your way back east." His companions laughed. William kept working, didn't look up. "Hey, I'm talking to you." William paused, looked up calmly. "I'm busy. Did you need something?" Jake's smile had no warmth. "Just wondering why a man would dig his own grave. When winter comes, you'll understand." "Oh, I understand already. I understand you don't know the first thing about surviving out here. You and your kids are going to freeze solid come January." William returned to his work. "We'll see." The cowboys rode off laughing. Benjamin came out from where he'd been watching. "Papa, why do they laugh at you?" William drove the pickaxe into stubborn clay. "Because they don't understand engineering, son. When people don't understand something, they mock it. Makes them feel smart. But you are smart. Smarter than them. Different smart. I understand rock and heat in mathematics. They understand cattle and weather and grass. Both kinds of smart matter." He looked at Benjamin. "But math doesn't care if people believe in it or not. It works whether they laugh or not." October 20th, the trench was complete. 60 feet long, 5 feet deep, 4 feet wide. The excavated earth formed long berms on either side. William stood in his creation, looking up at the strip of sky above. Now came the critical part. The engineering that would prove his theory or destroy it. He began building the A-frame structure inside the trench. Timbers at 45-degree angles peaked at the center. The geometry distributed the weight of the earth that would cover it. Each joint precisely measured, each angle calculated. Benjamin helped, handing tools, holding timber steady. William taught as he worked, explaining load distribution, compression, forces, why the A shape was stronger than any other. "It's like the roof of a house, but upside down underground," Benjamin observed. "Exactly. The weight of the earth pushes down and out. The A shape redirects those forces into the ground itself." Grace sat on the edge of the trench legs, dangling, drawing pictures of the construction. Her artwork showed a family of rabbits building an underground house. She insisted on showing William each new picture. "That's beautiful, sweetheart," he'd say every time, meaning it. Over 4 days, William completed the framework. Then came the corrugated iron sheets, overlapped by 6 inches to prevent water penetration. He worked with methodical precision, checking and rechecking each joint. Finally, he began shoveling the excavated earth back over the structure. 2 feet of packed earth over the iron. Then the berms on top of that. The tunnel disappeared beneath a long, grass-covered mound running across the yard. October 31st, William installed the doors. Heavy timber construction insulated with compressed wool from their sheep. One door at the cabin end opening from the corner of the kitchen. One at the barn end positioned in the warmest corner near the cattle. November 1st, late afternoon. William stood with Benjamin and Grace looking at their creation. From the outside, it looked bizarre. An earthen barrow connecting 2 small buildings, like something from ancient times. "It looks strange, Papa," Grace said quietly. "It does," William agreed. "But strange doesn't mean wrong." "Can we go inside?" Benjamin asked. William opened the cabin side door. Stairs descended into lamplight. "Let's see if it works." They went down together. The tunnel stretched before them, timber ceiling overhead, earth walls on either side, gravel floor underfoot. The silence was profound. No wind, no sound from outside at all. Just their footsteps crunching on gravel. The air felt cool but not cold, maybe 48 degrees. The walls radiated a subtle warmth that seemed impossible but was absolutely real. They walked the 60 feet, emerged in the barn. The cows looked up, unbothered by visitors from underground. Grace laughed with delight. It's like a secret passage. Benjamin ran his hand along the earth wall. Papa, it's warmer than the cabin. Body heat from the animals, William explained, and the earth itself, both working together. They walked back through, emerged in the cabin. Grace ran to the window to look out at the mound, then back at the tunnel door, trying to reconcile the two. William stood alone in the tunnel after the children went to bed. He had a lamp but extinguished it, wanting to feel the space and darkness. The silence pressed against his ears. The earth smell filled his lungs. He placed his palm against the wall and felt the steady, patient warmth of the ground itself. "I hope this works," he whispered. "I hope I'm not wrong." Because if he was wrong, if his calculations had missed something critical, winter would be merciless. November brought the first hard freeze, 20 degrees at night. William monitored his system obsessively. Tunnel air temperature at the barn end, 52 degrees. Tunnel air temperature at the cabin end, 54 degrees. Cabin interior with small fire, 58 degrees. Outside temperature, 20 degrees. The system was working. An air from the barn warmed by cattle and earth flowing into the cabin. The stove boosting that pre-warmed air the final few degrees. Firewood consumption dramatically lower than expected. William documented everything in his engineering notebook. Temperature readings 3 times per day. Fuel consumption measured precisely. Weather conditions noted. But he told no one. Let them think what they wanted. The data would speak when winter truly arrived. On November 14th, Silas Croft came to call. The old builder stood in William's yard looking at the earthen mound with barely concealed disgust. "Hartley, I don't mean to pry into your business." William waited. When someone said they didn't mean to pry, they always did. "But that thing," Silas gestured at the mound, "come spring, thaw all that snow on top melts. Water's going to run down, saturate the ground. Your trench is going to flood like a bucket. Then that water is going to seep into your foundation. Rot your sills clean through. You're building yourself a mud trap." William had anticipated this. "I've laid 6 inches of gravel for drainage. The floor slopes toward the barn away from the cabin foundation. That's theory. I've been building in Dakota for 40 years. I know how water behaves in spring. This is going to fail, and when it does, you'll have worse problems than you started with." "Thank you for the concern," William said evenly. Silas studied him. "You're a stubborn man, Hartley. Stubbornness out here gets people killed." After Silas left, William went back to his calculations. Had he missed something about spring drainage? He reviewed his slope measurements, his gravel depth, his understanding of soil permeability. The math held. But Silas had 40 years of experience. William made a note to monitor the drainage carefully come spring. If Silas was right, he'd need to install additional measures. But for now, winter was coming, and the tunnel was ready. November 28th, the first major cold snap. Temperature dropped to -8 overnight. Wind picked up to sustained 20 miles per hour. Outside William's cabin, the cold was a living thing. It searched for cracks, exploited every weakness, tried to force its way inside. Inside, Benjamin and Grace did their lessons at the table. Both wore simple shirts. The stove burned with a modest fire. The cabin temperature held steady at 60 degrees. William recorded the data with something approaching wonder. Outside, -8. Tunnel barn end, 50 degrees. Tunnel cabin end, 52 degrees. Cabin, 60 degrees. Firewood consumed in 24 hours, 1/10 of a cord. At this rate, his 4 cords would last the entire winter, with wood left over. The math had been right. William looked at his children, warm and comfortable, and felt something he hadn't felt since Catherine died. Not quite happiness, but close. Relief, maybe. Or vindication. He thought of the master builders and the ranchers and the cowboys, thought of their certainty that his project would fail. They didn't know yet, but they would. Winter was just beginning, and William Hartley's tunnel was about to face its true test. December arrived not with drama, but with mathematics. The temperature dropped in measurable increments that William recorded with engineer's precision. December 1st, 15 degrees. December 4th, -2. December 8th, -12 overnight. the valley began to suffer in ways both predictable and terrible. At the Colby Ranch, the largest and wealthiest operation within 50 miles, the foreman kept meticulous records that would later reveal the scope of their struggle. Week 1 of December consumed 1.2 cords of expensive seasoned oak. The main house temperature held at 48 degrees in the primary rooms. The bunkhouse where 12 ranch hands lived never climbed above 38. Men woke to find their water buckets frozen solid ice thick enough to support a boot. The cost was staggering. $21.60 per week just for firewood. And they were the fortunate ones. Silas Croft's beautiful 2-story house, built with every technique the master craftsman knew, bled heat like a sieve. His family of 6 huddled in the kitchen, the only room they could keep marginally warm. Ice formed on the inside of bedroom windows. Frost crept across walls. The furnace consumed wood at a rate that terrified Silas, who understood costs better than most. His wife Sarah wrapped herself in 3 layers and still shivered. "Why is it so cold? You built this house perfectly." Silas had no answer. He'd done everything right according to 40 years of accumulated wisdom. Tight joints, good chinking, proper insulation in the walls. But the cold found ways in that shouldn't exist. The house leaked precious heat into the Dakota night almost as fast as the furnace could produce it. Thomas Brennan's family fared worse. They'd entered winter with insufficient fuel gambling that they could buy more when needed. But demand had driven prices to $22 per cord, money Thomas didn't have. By mid-December, they were burning furniture. Chairs first, then the spare table, then anything wood that wasn't structural. His children coughed in the cold. His wife's hands cracked and bled from the dry, freezing air. Thomas stared at those hands and felt shame burn in his gut. He'd mocked William Hartley, called him a fool. And now Thomas was feeding his family's future to the fire just to survive the present. Through it all, a few people began noticing anomalies at the Hartley place. Henry Walsh, making his bitter rounds checking fence lines in -18-degree cold, rode past William's property on December 10th. He pulled his horse to a stop, frowning at the cabin's chimney. Barely any smoke. Every other chimney in the valley belched thick black columns, the desperate exhalation of fires pushed to their limits. But Hartley's chimney produced only a thin, pale wisp, like smoke from a pipe rather than a heating fire. Henry sat his horse for several minutes trying to make sense of it. Either Hartley's fire had gone out and the family was freezing, or something impossible was happening. He almost rode to the door to check, but pride stopped him. He'd laughed at Hartley's project along with everyone else. Showing concern now felt like admitting doubt. He rode home instead, but the image of that thin smoke haunted him. That evening, he told his wife, Martha, "Something's wrong at the Hartley place. Almost no smoke from the chimney." Martha looked up from her mending. "Wrong or different?" "There's no difference. You can't heat a house without fire." "Maybe he's heating it differently." Henry snorted. "That's impossible." Martha said nothing more, but she'd been watching William Hartley's cabin for weeks. She'd noticed things. The children playing outside in lighter coats than other kids wore. William himself moving between buildings without the hunched, desperate posture of someone fighting killing cold. Small details that didn't fit the narrative of the doomed engineer. On December 15th, Grace Hartley developed a cough. William's blood turned to ice water the moment he heard it. That small sound, barely noticeable, carried the weight of his worst memories. Catherine's illness had started exactly the same way. A minor cough, nothing alarming, until it was everything. "It's just a tickle, Papa," Grace said, but then coughed again. Harder. William felt Benjamin watching him, saw the fear in his son's eyes. The boy remembered too. "Come here, sweetheart." William felt Grace's forehead, warm but not feverish. Not yet. That night he sat by her bed listening to her breathe. Every cough made his heart seize. He'd promised Catherine he'd protect them. Promised he wouldn't let the cold take what disease had tried to claim. By December 17th, Grace's fever had climbed to 101 degrees. She lay listless in her bed, eyes glazed, skin flushed. The cough came in fits that shook her small frame. William faced the hardest decision of his life. The doctor was in town 12 miles distant. The temperature outside hovered at -28. The roads were drifted, treacherous, potentially impassable. Taking Grace out in that cold might kill her faster than the fever. But staying meant relying on his own limited medical knowledge and prayer. Benjamin found his father sitting at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning, head in his hands. "Papa, Is Grace going to die? William looked at his 9-year-old son, saw the terror there, the memory of losing one parent already. No, I won't let that happen. How do you know? Because the cabin is warm, because she can rest without shivering, because stable temperature gives her body strength to fight. William said it with confidence he didn't entirely feel. But the engineering was sound. The cabin maintained 61 degrees with perfect consistency. No wild swings, no cold corners where sickness could deepen its grip. The humidity from the earth tunnel kept the air from becoming desert dry. Grace could heal here in ways she couldn't in the drafty, freezing cabins where other children were falling sick. For 3 days, William barely slept. He made poultices from herbs he'd learned about from mining camp doctors, fed Grace warm broth every 2 hours, kept her comfortable and still, and the cabin's warmth wrapped around them all like a living thing. On December 20th, Grace's fever broke. She opened her eyes clearly for the first time in days and said, "Papa, I'm hungry." William's vision blurred with tears. He pulled his daughter close, felt her breathing steady and strong against his chest. "Thank God," he whispered. "Thank God." Benjamin hugged them both. "The tunnel helped, didn't it, Papa?" The warm air kept her from getting worse. William nodded, unable to speak. His system had done more than save firewood. It had saved his daughter's life. That same day brought catastrophe to the Miller family. Jack Miller had been burning green wood, unable to afford properly seasoned oak. Green wood produced more smoke than heat, required tremendous amounts to achieve any warmth, and filled chimneys with creosote, a tar-like substance that could ignite catastrophically. On the night of December 20th, the Miller chimney caught fire. Flames shot 15 feet into the black sky. The family woke to the roar of fire above their heads. Jack had seconds to decide. Let it burn and lose the house, or extinguish it and lose their heating in minus 30-degree cold. He grabbed buckets, ran outside into cold that felt like knives, and began throwing snow into the chimney. The fire died with a hiss and groan of cooling brick. But now the Millers had no heat. None. And the temperature inside their cabin began dropping immediately. 30 degrees, 25, 20. The children cried from the cold. Jack's wife bundled them in every blanket and quilt they owned. It wasn't enough. At 18 degrees inside, hypothermia became inevitable. Jack made the desperate decision to carry his family to the Brennan place over a mile distant. He wrapped his youngest, a 2-year-old boy, against his chest. His wife and 2 older children stumbled through knee-deep snow beside him. They made it. Barely. Jack's hands were black with frostbite. His youngest child was nearly gone, saved only by his father's body heat. 2 fingers on Jack's right hand would later require amputation. The story raced through the valley like wildfire. Winter wasn't just uncomfortable this year, it was killing people. On December 21st, Silas Croft made a decision born of desperation and conscience. He loaded his sleigh with half a cord of his finest oak wood he'd planned to save for his own family and set out to deliver it to families he knew were in crisis. His first stop was supposed to be the Miller family, but they were at the Brennans. His second stop should have been the Brennans themselves. But some impulse he couldn't name made him detour first to William Hartley's place. Silas told himself he just wanted to check on the stubborn engineer and his children, make sure they were still alive before focusing on the truly desperate cases. The truth was more complex. That thin smoke from Hartley's chimney bothered him, nagged at him, challenged everything he thought he knew. The temperature that morning was minus 26. Wind blew steady at 15 miles per hour, driving wind chill to minus 50. Exposed skin would freeze in under 3 minutes. Silas saw William Hartley outside. The engineer stood near the barn entrance wearing a heavy wool coat but no hat, no thick wrappings. He was scattering grain for the chickens, who pecked contentedly in a sheltered area. He moved without urgency, without the hunched, frantic posture everyone else adopted in such cold. Silas pulled his sleigh to a stop, unable to process what he was seeing. "Mr. Hartley." William looked up, saw Silas. "Morning, Silas. Bitter day. You're outside, without proper gear. Just feeding the chickens. Only takes a minute." William smiled slightly. "I'm going right back inside through the barn, via the tunnel, barely any exposure." He said it casually, like discussing the weather. Silas sat on his sleigh, reeling. The tunnel, that insane project everyone had mocked. Hartley was actually using it. In minus 26-degree cold, he was moving between buildings without facing the wind at all. The tunnel works then, Silas heard himself ask. Works perfectly. Would you like to see spa? Silas knew he should refuse, should continue his charity deliveries. But curiosity and something deeper, some primal need to understand, made him nod. William led him into the barn. The space was dim and warm with animal smell. The cows chewed hay peacefully. And in the corner, a heavy timber door stood open, revealing stairs descending into lamplight. They went down together. Silence enveloped them instantly. The wind's howl vanished as if cut by a knife. The temperature rose perceptibly. Not warm, but not the killing cold of the surface. Something in between. Something impossible. The tunnel stretched ahead, timber ceiling arcing overhead, earth walls solid on either side. William's lamp cast moving shadows. Go ahead, William said. Touch the wall. Silas removed his heavy mitten and placed his palm against the packed earth. Warmth radiated into his skin. Not much, but unmistakable. The earth was warm. It's 48 degrees down here, William explained. All the time. Summer and winter. The earth below the frost line doesn't experience seasons. It just holds the average annual temperature. They walked the 60 feet. Their footsteps crunched on gravel. No drafts, no wind, just still air that held its warmth. They emerged in the Hartley cabin. The difference was immediate and devastating to Silas's understanding of the world. Warmth embraced them, real warmth, comfortable warmth. Benjamin and Grace sat at the table in cotton shirts playing with wooden blocks. They looked up and smiled. Silas stumbled to the thermometer on the wall like a man in a trance. Wiped the glass with his sleeve, though it didn't need wiping. 62 degrees. Silas Croft, master builder, 40 years of experience, felt his legs weaken. He sat heavily in the chair William pulled out for him. The mathematics assembled themselves in his mind with brutal clarity. His own house burning 2.5 cords per month, barely holding 55 degrees in one room. The Colby Ranch burning 2 cords per month for 48 degrees. The Brennans burning furniture to reach 42 degrees. William Hartley burning less than 3/4 of a cord per month for 62 degrees. It wasn't incremental improvement. It was categorical difference. How much fuel have you used since December 1st? Silas asked, his voice hoarse. William retrieved his notebook. 20 days, 0.67 cords. Projected monthly consumption approximately 1 cord. 1 cord. Silas was burning 2.5, and Silas's house was freezing. Your stove isn't even hot, Silas observed. The cast iron glowed gently, but not the red heat of desperate overfiring. Doesn't need to be. The tunnel delivers air that's already 50 degrees. The stove just boosts it 12 more degrees. I'm not fighting the cold. I'm working with what the earth provides. Silas looked around the cabin, at the children comfortable and healthy, at the modest fire that accomplished more than the roaring blazes consuming everyone else's fuel, at the thermometer that didn't lie. I mocked you, Silas said quietly. I called your project foolish. You didn't understand the principle. Most people don't. Mining engineers learn about geothermal gradients because our lives depend on it underground. Surface builders never need to. I was wrong. The admission cost Silas everything. His pride, his expertise, his certainty. 40 years building, and I was wrong about the most basic thing, about how to stay warm. William poured coffee for both of them. You weren't wrong, Silas. You were incomplete. There's a difference. Your houses are well built. They just don't leverage the earth. They sat in the warm cabin while outside the cold tried to kill everything that breathed. Silas felt something shifting in his chest, some fundamental understanding rearranging itself. You have to tell people, Silas finally said, this could save lives. I'm not good at telling people things. Then I'll tell them, with your permission. William studied the old builder's face, saw genuine humility there, genuine awe. Yes, tell them. Anyone who wants to learn, send them to me. Silas stood. He had other deliveries to make other families desperately in need, but he would return, and he would spread the word. Before leaving, he turned to William. I came here expecting to find you freezing. I brought firewood to save you. Keep it for the Millers, or the Brennans. They need it more. Silas shook William's hand, the grip of one engineer to another. You've changed at everything, Hartley. You know that? After Silas left, William stood at his window, watching the sleigh disappear into the white landscape. Benjamin came to stand beside him. "He believed you now," the boy said. "He saw the evidence. Hard to argue with a thermometer." "Will others believe?" William put his hand on his son's shoulder. "Some will, some won't. But the ones who need to survive will learn. That's all that matters." Over the next week, Silas Croft became William Hartley's unlikely evangelist. He completed his mercy deliveries, bringing firewood to the desperate. But everywhere he went, he spoke of what he'd seen. 62 degrees, he'd say, and watch faces turn skeptical. "I saw the thermometer myself, touched it, stood in his cabin. The man has solved winter." Henry Walsh heard it at the general store, rode immediately to his house, and told Martha, "Silas says Hartley's system works, really works." Martha didn't look surprised. "I told you he might know something we didn't." "I should go see." "Yes, you should." Thomas Brennan heard it from Silas directly when the old builder delivered wood. The rancher who'd mocked William so thoroughly sat silent as Silas described the tunnel, the warmth, the impossible thermometer reading. "He's keeping 2 children alive and comfortable on less fuel than any of us use. And he's not even trying hard." Thomas felt shame settle over him like a weight. He'd called Hartley a fool, had assumed frontier experience trumped education every time, had been completely devastatingly wrong. On January 10th, the atmospheric pressure began to fall. Old Pete Carson, who'd survived more Dakota winters than anyone could count, stood outside the general store testing the air like an animal sensing danger. "Barometer's dropping like a stone," he announced to anyone who'd listen. "Big storm coming, real big." The warning spread. Families checked their fuel supplies with growing dread, reinforced their shelters, prayed. William felt it too. The eerie calm, the odd yellow quality to the sky, the way the chickens huddled together restless and afraid. He checked his systems methodically. Firewood stacked and accessible, tunnel clear, doors secure, food stored, water available. He had 1.5 cords remaining, more than sufficient. His family would be safe. That night, he gathered Benjamin and Grace. "Tomorrow we stay inside, no matter what. Understood?" "Is a storm coming, Papa?" Grace asked. "Yes, a bad one. But we'll be safe." William looked at his children, at the warm cabin around them, at the tunnel that had exceeded every calculation he'd made. "Yes, sweetheart, we'll be safe." January 12th dawned with that same yellow sky. The air felt thick, oppressive. By 10 in the morning, the temperature had dropped from -28 to -35. At 11, the wind began. At noon, the blizzard hit like the wrath of God. Temperature plunged to 42 below zero in less than 2 hours. Wind screamed to 55 miles per hour. Snow didn't fall. It shot horizontally like millions of tiny bullets. Visibility dropped to nothing. A man couldn't see his hand in front of his face. Wind chill reached 82 degrees below zero. Exposure meant death in under 10 minutes. The valley became a white hell. Families huddled in whatever shelter they had and prayed for survival. Fires were fed every scrap of burnable material. People wore every piece of clothing they owned and still froze. At the Colby Ranch bunkhouse, men piled together for warmth as the temperature inside dropped to 28 degrees. One young hand, 19 years old, began showing signs of hypothermia. Confusion, slurred speech, loss of coordination. The others had to hold him down and force body heat into him to keep him alive. In Silas Croft's house, the family abandoned all rooms except the kitchen. 6 people in one small space burning furniture now because the firewood had run out faster than expected. The temperature held at 42 degrees, barely survivable. Thomas Brennan's family burned the last chair and began on floorboards they could pry up. The children cried from cold and fear. Thomas held them and wondered if he'd killed his family through pride and poor planning. In William Hartley's cabin, Benjamin and Grace played quietly at the table. Both wore simple wool shirts. The stove burned with a modest fire. The cabin temperature held steady at 61 degrees. William recorded the data in his notebook, marveling despite himself. Outside temperature -42, wind chill -82, tunnel air 51 degrees, cabin 61 degrees, fuel consumption rate normal. The system wasn't just working, it was proving itself under the most extreme conditions imaginable. Grace looked up from her drawing. "Papa, can we hear the wind?" William listened. Through the cabin walls came a faint howl, muted and distant. A little, but not much. I like that we're safe, she said simply. Benjamin was reading by lamplight, completely absorbed, as if this were any normal winter day. William looked at his children, warm and unconcerned, and felt something profound settle in his chest. Not pride exactly, something deeper. The knowledge that he'd kept his promise to Catherine. He'd protected them, given them not just survival, but comfort, security, peace. Outside, the storm raged with mindless fury. Inside, surrounded by earth and engineering, William Hartley's family waited in warmth for the world to remember mercy. The blizzard showed no mercy through the long darkness of January 12th. Silas Croft had made a decision that morning that his wife called suicide. He would take his best firewood to families who had none, even if it meant traveling through conditions that could kill a man in minutes. Sarah had grabbed his arm with both hands. "You'll die out there. The wind alone will kill you." The Millers are at the Brennans with no home. The Brennans are burning their house to stay alive. If I don't go, people will freeze to death. Then let them come here. They can't travel in this. You know that. Sarah had released him then, knowing that trying to stop Silas Croft once he'd decided on a course was like trying to stop winter itself. She helped him bundle in every warm thing they owned and watched him disappear into the white chaos. The journey to William Hartley's cabin took nearly 2 hours for what should have been a 20-minute drive. Silas could barely see his horses' heads. The animals were terrified, fighting him at every step. 3 times he nearly turned back. 3 times he forced them onward. He reached William's property more by instinct than sight. The cabin materialized from the whiteout like a ghost, and Silas felt his heart seize because he was certain he'd find frozen corpses inside. The thin smoke from the chimney, barely visible through the storm, seemed like a death marker rather than a sign of life. He half fell from the sleigh, fought his way to the door through wind that tried to tear him from his feet, and hammered with a fist he could no longer feel. The door opened and warmth struck him like a physical thing. William stood there utterly calm and said the words that would echo in Silas's memory forever. "You shouldn't be out in this weather." Now standing in that impossible warmth, watching ice melt from his beard and drip onto the wooden floor, Silas felt his entire understanding of the world restructure itself. William guided him to a chair, poured hot coffee that Silas wrapped his frozen hands around. The warmth was agony as feeling returned to his fingers. "I brought firewood," Silas managed to say. "Thought you'd be freezing." "We're fine. Using less than normal, actually. The colder it gets outside, the more efficient the system becomes." Silas looked at him blankly. "The temperature differential drives convection," William explained. "Cold air is denser, wants to sink. Warm air wants to rise. The tunnel creates a natural circulation pattern. The colder the surface, the stronger the flow." "You're telling me this system works better in worse weather?" "Within limits, yes." Silas laughed. It came out half strangled. "I've spent 40 years fighting winter, building thicker walls, burning more wood. And you're telling me the answer was to use the cold itself?" "Not use it. Work with it. Let physics do what physics wants to do." William refilled the coffee. "The earth doesn't fight the seasons, Silas. It absorbs them, moderates them. We just had to figure out how to access that moderation." "Show me again. The tunnel. I need to understand." They descended together into that realm of silence and steady warmth. Silas touched the walls, felt the consistent temperature that had nothing to do with the killing cold raging above. William explained the principles with an engineer's precision, but also with something else, a teacher's patience. The frost line in Dakota is 4.5 feet. Above that, the ground freezes and thaws with the seasons. Below that, it stays between 45 and 55 degrees year-round. That's not magic. That's thermal mass and insulation. The Earth is the largest battery in existence. They walked the length of the tunnel. Silas examined the timber framing the corrugated iron roof, the gravel drainage, the careful slope that carried any moisture away from the cabin foundation. "You designed this all yourself." "The principles came from mining engineering, Russian techniques I learned years ago. I just adapted them to residential heating." "How much did it cost?" $98 for materials, 3 weeks of labor. Silas did the calculation instantly. His family had spent over $60 on firewood already this winter and would spend at least that much more before spring. William's system had paid for itself in saved fuel in a single season and would continue saving money every winter for as long as it stood. They emerged into the barn. The cows regarded them with patient bovine eyes. The air here was warmer than the tunnel, heated by the animal's body mass. "This is where the warm air originates," William said. "The cattle produce heat. That warm air gets drawn into the tunnel, warmed further by contact with the earth, and flows into the cabin. I'm not generating heat, I'm harvesting it." Back in the cabin, Benjamin brought Silas a plate of bread and preserves. The boy moved with quiet confidence, clearly comfortable in his role as host. "Your father is a genius," Silas told him. Benjamin smiled. "He just listens to the numbers. The numbers don't lie." "Your father teach you that?" "He teaches me everything." Silas looked at William, saw the relationship there. A father passing knowledge to a son, not through lecture, but through doing, through shared work and shared discovery. "I need to continue my deliveries," Silas said, standing. "The Millers, the Brennans, they're in desperate shape." "Take my firewood," William offered. "I have more than I need." "You're giving away fuel." "I'm giving away excess. There's a difference." Silas loaded 4 large logs onto a sleigh wood that William could spare, because his system was so efficient. Before leaving, the old builder turned to face William directly. "I was wrong about you. Completely wrong. I need to tell people what you've done here. Tell whoever you want, but I'm not looking for recognition. This isn't about recognition. It's about survival. If people understood this, they could live instead of just endure." Silas climbed onto his sleigh and drove back into the storm, a man transformed. He'd arrived expecting to save William Hartley. He was leaving having been saved himself, though not from cold, from ignorance, from the prison of thinking he knew everything. Over the next 3 days, as the blizzard slowly exhausted itself, Silas told his story everywhere he went. In houses where families huddled around dying fires, he spoke of 62 degrees and comfortable children and a thermometer that didn't lie. Most people thought grief and cold had driven him mad, but a few listened, a few wondered, a few allowed the possibility that everything they thought they knew might be incomplete. Henry Walsh was one of them. The skeptical German farmer appeared at William's door on January 15th, hat literally in hand. "Herr Hartley, Silas Croft says your tunnel system works. I would like to see for myself." William showed him everything: the tunnel, the principles, the data in his engineering notebook. Henry examined it all with the methodical attention of a man whose survival depended on understanding. "This is remarkable," Henry said finally. "How much would it cost to build one for my place?" "Depends on distance and materials, but probably less than you'll spend on firewood this winter." "Will you help me design it?" "I'll draw you plans, no charge." Henry gripped William's hand. "Thank you, and I apologize for doubting." "No apology needed. You couldn't know until you saw." Martha Walsh came with her husband on the second visit. She walked the tunnel in silence, emerged with tears in her eyes. "This is wonderful," she said simply. "You've made a home that it protects instead of just shelters." She became William's second advocate, speaking to the women of the valley while Silas spoke to the men. Between them, they planted seeds of possibility in minds hardened by tradition. But the true turning point came on January 16th with an event William had neither planned nor anticipated. Thomas Brennan had finally scraped together enough money to buy firewood in town. The journey should have been simple, but his horse slipped on ice, broke its leg, and threw Thomas hard. The rancher's ankle twisted badly, possibly broken, and he found himself half a mile from William's cabin, unable to walk in 25 below zero cold. He tried to crawl, made it perhaps 50 feet before his strength gave out. The cold began to work its way into his bones, slowing his thoughts, making him sleepy. Hypothermia's gentle death. Benjamin saw him from the cabin window. "Papa, someone's outside." William grabbed his coat and ran, though not through the cabin door. He went down through the tunnel, up into the barn, and out the barn door. The road kept him sheltered from wind until the last moment, minimizing exposure. He found Thomas barely conscious in the snow. "Thomas, can you hear me?" A mumble, eyes unfocused. William got the larger man's arm over his shoulder, half carried and half dragged him to the barn, down into the tunnel, along that corridor of warmth, up into the cabin. Benjamin had already prepared blankets by the stove. Grace brought hot water for tea. They worked together, the three of them, stripping Thomas's frozen outer clothes and wrapping him in dry warmth. Slowly, color returned to Thomas's face. His eyes cleared. He looked around the cabin at the thermometer showing 60 degrees at the children who had helped save him, at William, who'd risked exposure to pull him from death. "You saved my life," Thomas said, his voice cracking. "You're my neighbor. Of course I did. I called you a fool. I mocked your project. You didn't understand it. Now you do." Thomas began to cry. Great racking sobs from a hard man broken by shame and gratitude. "I was so wrong about everything. About you, about what it takes to survive out here." William let him cry. Sometimes a man needed to break before he could rebuild himself properly. Thomas stayed for 2 days while his ankle healed enough to walk. In that time, he saw how the family lived. The comfort, the efficiency, the absence of the constant desperate struggle against cold that defined everyone else's winter. When he finally left, supported by William on one side and Benjamin on the other, Thomas Brennan had become William Hartley's most vocal convert. He told everyone, at the general store, at church, at the Ranchers Association meeting, "I'm alive because of Hartley's engineering. My pride nearly killed me. His science saved me." The dam broke. People began arriving at William's door, first in ones and twos, then in groups. They wanted to see, to understand, to learn. William found himself giving tours of the tunnel, explaining principles of geothermal heating and passive ventilation to ranchers and farmers and builders who'd never thought about such things. He drew diagrams, shared his calculations, answered every question with patient precision. Benjamin helped, having absorbed the principles so thoroughly he could explain them almost as well as his father. The boy sketched clean illustrations that made the concepts accessible even to those with limited education. "It's like the earth is a blanket," Benjamin would say. "It keeps warm things warm and cool things cool all year round. We're just tucking ourselves into that blanket." Grace served cookies and tea to visitors, her innocent hospitality breaking down the last barriers of skepticism. How could a system be dangerous or foolish when it kept this cheerful child so obviously safe and happy? In January 26th, the Valley held a meeting at the church. Pastor Williams had organized it at the request of several families who wanted William to present his findings publicly. William almost refused. He hated public speaking, hated attention. But Silas convinced him. "People need to hear this from you, not secondhand, from the engineer who built it." So William stood before 87 people packed into the small church and felt his mouth go dry. He'd faced down mine collapses and equipment failures without flinching, but public speaking terrified him in ways physical danger never could. Then he looked at the faces, saw the Millers whose children had nearly died, saw the Brennans who'd burned their furniture, saw families who'd suffered terribly and didn't want to suffer again. They needed knowledge more than he needed comfort. "I'm not a builder," William began, his voice steadying. "I'm a mining engineer, but the principles are the same. Understand the earth, understand heat, understand air movement." He explained geothermal gradient in terms a child could grasp, drew diagrams on the church's blackboard showing frost lines and temperature stability, showed his notebook with its months of recorded data. Below 5 feet, Dakota Earth stays between 45 and 55 degrees all year. That's not theory, that's measurable fact. If you can bring air into contact with that stable temperature, you can pre-warm it before it enters your home. Your heating system stops fighting negative 40-degree air and starts boosting 50-degree air. The fuel savings are substantial. He laid out costs, materials, labor time, compared it to firewood expenses. The mathematics were irrefutable. This isn't magic, it's physics, and physics is available to anyone willing to learn it. Questions came rapid fire. How deep exactly? What about drainage? What if you hit rock? How long does it last? Can it be built in stages? William answered every question with engineer's precision. When he couldn't answer, he said so plainly and offered to research it. Silas Croft stood. "I've built houses in Dakota for 40 years. I thought I knew everything about staying warm. William Hartley taught me I knew nothing. Everything he's told you is true. I've seen it, measured it. His system works." Thomas Brennan stood leaning on a cane. "He saved my life, both with his tunnel and by pulling me out of the snow. I owe him everything. More important, his principles can save all of us." Henry Walsh rose. "I am building one, starting next week. With Herr Hartley's guidance, hands went up across the room. I want to build one too. Can you help me design it? Will you teach us? William looked at the sea of faces and felt something shift surrounding him. He'd been alone for so long, isolated by education and grief, and the simple fact that he related better to numbers than to people. But teaching, he realized, was a bridge. When he explained engineering, he connected. When he shared knowledge, he belonged. I'll help anyone who wants to learn, he said, free of charge. All I ask is that you pay it forward. Teach the next person. The room erupted in applause. William stood embarrassed and moved, not knowing where to look, until Benjamin grabbed his hand and squeezed. You did good, Papa, the boy whispered. Spring came eventually, as it always does. The great thaw that Silas had warned about arrived in late March. Snow melted, water ran, and William's drainage system performed exactly as designed. The gravel bed absorbed runoff. The slope carried excess water away from the cabin toward the lower-lying barn. Not a drop entered the living space. Silas inspected it personally, shook his head in wonder. You accounted for everything. I tried to. Engineering is about anticipating failure modes. By May 12, families had begun construction on their own tunnel systems. Henry Walsh built a 35-foot version connecting his house to his milking shed. Thomas Brennan hired William as a consultant, paying $20 for a design that incorporated stone walls for extra thermal mass. Jake Mercer, the cowboy who'd mocked William so cruelly, appeared hat in hand. Mr. Hartley, I was wrong about you. Dead wrong. Could you teach me how to build one of these? William taught him. Taught them all. Evening after evening, his cabin became a classroom. Ranchers and farmers sat on his floor studying diagrams by lamplight, asking questions, taking notes. Benjamin assisted, increasingly confident in his understanding. The boy had absorbed the principles so thoroughly that he could spot errors in other people's designs. That angle's wrong, he'd say, pointing to a sketch. 30 degrees won't distribute the load properly. Needs to be 45. William would verify his son's assessment, then nod. Benjamin's right, 45 degrees. The valley's respect for William grew, but so did something else. Affection. He wasn't just the engineer who'd solved an impossible problem. He was the patient teacher who shared freely, the neighbor who'd pulled Thomas from death, the father raising two remarkable children alone. Women began appearing at his door with food. Just thought you might like some fresh bread, Mr. Hartley. Men offered help with repairs. Got some time this Saturday if you need a hand with anything. William accepted it all awkwardly, unused to community care. But he accepted it, and slowly the loneliness that had gripped him since Catherine's death began to ease. In early April, a stranger arrived. Mr. Cornelius, Abernathy County Extension agent, well-dressed and official. He carried surveying equipment and a notebook. Mr. Hartley, I've heard remarkable claims about your heating system. I'd like to document them officially. William showed him everything. Abernathy measured and recorded with scientific precision. Temperature at various depths, airflow rates, fuel consumption data, cost analysis. He spent 3 days taking measurements, checking calculations, verifying claims. On the final day, he sat with William at the kitchen table and said, "This is extraordinary. You've achieved heating efficiency I didn't think possible with passive systems. It's just applied physics. It's revolutionary. I'm writing a bulletin for the Territorial Agricultural Department. With your permission, I'll call it the Hartley Method." William felt uncomfortable with the name, but recognized the value of official documentation. Use whatever name helps people learn. Abernathy's bulletin was published in June of 1888, titled Geothermal Augmentation for Plains Dwellings, the Hartley Method. It contained detailed diagrams, temperature data, cost analysis, and step-by-step construction guidance. The bulletin spread across Dakota Territory into Montana and Minnesota. Within a year, 50 families had built Hartley tunnels. Within 5 years, hundreds. William's name became synonymous with innovation, with the idea that frontier survival didn't have to mean suffering, that intelligence and adaptation mattered as much as toughness and endurance. But the deepest impact was on Benjamin. The boy who'd helped push wheelbarrows of dirt now spent hours drawing increasingly sophisticated designs. Who'd asked simple questions about warm Earth now debated thermodynamics with visiting engineers. On a summer evening in 1889, an 11-year-old Benjamin announced his decision. "Papa, I want to be an engineer. Like you. William felt his throat tighten. What kind of engineer? Building engineer. Someone who designs houses that work with nature instead of against it. William pulled his son close. Then you need to study mathematics. A lot of mathematics. I will. Will you teach me? Every day. They began that night. Advanced geometry and trigonometry that most children wouldn't encounter until university. Benjamin absorbed it like he'd been starving for it. Over the following years, father and son worked together on increasingly complex projects. They designed ventilation systems for the new schoolhouse, improved drainage for the church basement, consulted on the territorial government building in Yankton. William discovered that teaching his son was teaching himself to feel again, to hope, to imagine futures beyond simple survival. In 1895, Benjamin Hartley left for the University of Minnesota on a full academic scholarship. The day he boarded the train, William gave him the original engineering notebook, the one with all the calculations for the tunnel. This is where you started, son, but you'll go far beyond it. Benjamin gripped the notebook like scripture. I'll make you proud, Papa. You already have, from the day you helped me dig. They embraced on the platform, father and son, engineer and engineer. William watched the train disappear and felt Catherine's presence beside him. I kept my promise, he thought. I taught him, and I loved him. Both. The years that followed brought steady recognition. William never sought fame, but it found him anyway. The territorial government hired him as a consultant. The university invited him to lecture. Newspapers wrote articles about the practical genius who'd revolutionized frontier heating. He remained in his cabin with its tunnel, living, simply teaching, freely. Grace grew into a thoughtful young woman who became a teacher herself, carrying her father's love of education forward. William never remarried. I had my great love, he'd say when asked. One was enough. In 1915, 77-year-old William stood with Benjamin, now a professor of civil engineering at the University of Minnesota, at the site of the original cabin. The building was long gone, demolished in 1905, but the tunnel depression remained visible. They still teach about this at the university, Benjamin said. Call you the father of residential geothermal design. William smiled. Fancy words for a ditch. It was never just a ditch, Papa. It was proof that understanding beats tradition, that thinking differently saves lives. William knelt stiffly, his joints protesting age. He placed his palm on the earth, felt its patient solidity. The earth did the work, he said quietly. I just listened. You taught me to listen too. That's the real gift. They stood together in the Dakota wind, looking at the land that had tested them and that they'd learned to understand. Two engineers across generations connected by knowledge and love, and the simple, profound truth that nature wasn't an enemy to conquer, but a partner to understand. William Hartley died in 1921 at 72 years old. He passed peacefully in his cabin, the tunnel still functioning after 34 years of continuous operation. The temperature outside was 30 degrees below zero. Inside, the thermometer read 63 degrees. His funeral drew over 200 people, ranchers and farmers and engineers and students. People whose lives had been changed by a simple idea expressed through dirt and timber and patient calculation. The eulogy was delivered by Silas Croft, now 93, who said simply, William Hartley taught me that 40 years of experience means nothing if you can't still learn. He saved my life by showing me I didn't know everything. That's the mark of a true teacher. Benjamin had the headstone carved with words his father had lived by. He listened to the earth. In the decades that followed, earth-sheltered design became recognized as legitimate engineering. Modern passive solar homes, geothermal heating systems, and sustainable architecture all traced conceptual lineage back to a mining engineer who dug a tunnel to keep his children warm. In 1963, a graduate student studying frontier innovation discovered the original tunnel site. Excavation revealed timber still intact, preserved by the dry earth. William's initials carved into a support beam, WH. 1887. The student's thesis, the Hartley Geothermal Tunnel Prototype of Modern Earth-Sheltered Design, sparked renewed interest. Architects rediscovered William's principles. The energy crisis of the 1970s made his efficiency revolutionary again. Today, a historical marker stands at the site. Visitors come to see where one man's desperate mathematics became a legacy that spans centuries. On a cold November morning in 2024, a young mechanical engineer named Sarah Chen stood at that marker. She'd driven 4 hours from Minneapolis after reading about Hartley in a sustainability journal. She knelt where the tunnel had been, felt the earth beneath her gloved hand, pulled out her phone and texted her professor. Found it, the Hartley site. Everything we're doing with passive geothermal he figured out in 1887 with a shovel and a notebook. Her professor's reply came quickly. That's why we study history. The best ideas are usually waiting to be rediscovered. Sarah looked across the Dakota plain, imagining a desperate father digging in the twilight, a man who listened when the earth spoke. She thought of the affordable housing projects she'd been designing, struggling with heating costs for low-income families. William Hartley had solved that problem 137 years ago. She took photos of the Depression, the marker, the endless sky. Then she drove back to Minneapolis with a mind full of possibilities and the quiet certainty that sometimes the most revolutionary path forward was carved by those who came before. The earth still remembered, and she had learned to listen. The earth remembers even when we forget. Below the frost line, the temperature remains constant, 45 to 55 degrees. Patient, reliable, waiting for those wise enough to listen. William Hartley listened. And in listening, he heard not just the earth, but the future whispering through stone and soil. A future where survival came not from fighting harder, but from understanding deeper. Where the greatest strength wasn't endurance, but adaptation. Where an engineer could save his children and in doing so teach the world.